this thing?
I think clearly the main theme of today is jobs and the economy.
Absolutely.
Inevitably. You've talked, as is the Westminster consensus at the moment, about the need to rebalance the economy away from the financial sector towards manufacturing. Two things. You mentioned the Regional Growth Fund,
yes,
which has pretty much bypassed Coventry and Warwickshire and pretty much all everywhere else. It represents a 2/3 cut in what used to go to the regions. In Labour's 5-point plan for jobs, it mentions the Regional Growth Fund, but only £200 million more from Labour pledged so far. Does this point to the problem that you have between reality and the rhetoric? Ed Miliband talked today about no money around. Will we get anything more than just this minuscule increase if we were to have a Labour government in the Regional Growth Fund to help manufacturing and to help regions like Coventry and the West Midlands to get jobs?
Well, you've thrown quite a lot of issues into that, so let me just break it down. The 195 million, which is the proceeds from the bank bonus tax, which you've just referred to for regional growth, is part of the 5-point plan. The other part's been a temporary reduction in VAT to get more money into people's pockets, which will give your average family another £450 a year, which they will then go and spend in shops and businesses in this area. We've also said that you should have a reduction to 5%, in particular in the home improvements, repair and maintenance sector, which will massively help construction. That you should have a national insurance break for micro businesses. You should bring forward infrastructure spending too, in addition to the measures within the bank bonus tax. Now, the purpose of all of that, we are saying, is to get demand into the economy now. That is an immediate thing that you need to do. Now, in relation to the long term, and what spending commitments we make in 2015, it would be completely irresponsible of me to start making commitments as to how many billions we were going to spend on regional growth in 2015 now. But what we have said is looking at the abolition of the RDAs, through which we were channeling regional growth monies. I mean, obviously that was something that we thought was a backward step when they made that decision, not least because the RGF, as you said, has been cut by over a third. But it's not all about giving grant monies and funding to businesses through mechanisms like the Regional Growth Fund. It is also about how government can use the various levers that it has at its disposal to help businesses grow, to help businesses innovate. And one of the ways you can do that is through use of procurement. Government spends, and this is the big announcement we've made today, government spends around £240 billion a year, and that can be used in different creative ways. So we set up, for example, the Small Business and Research Initiative in government, which this government has carried on with, which is a way of procuring services from businesses, which would, at the same time that you're procuring the service, will help them develop new products which they can then produce and not only sell to government, but actually go out to sell in the market, which will produce more jobs and growth and produce more customers for them. So it isn't just about regional growth, though that is important, which is why we're putting this extra 195 million. It is also about the various other levers that government has, because it spends the money anyway, that can be used to help business. Now, in the future, would we like to be doing more? Of course we would. I think the big difference, I would say, to businesses...
You would like to do more for regional growth, accepting your 5 points.
We would.
There's only one element of that which actually tackles rebalancing the economy towards the regions.
We would. But
200 million is...
But in terms of the bigger picture, as I said, that's for the short term. In terms of the bigger picture, for the long term, what an active, intelligent government strategy looks like, working in partnership with business to produce the growth. This is why we've published this lengthy document today, to put out our direction of travel, if you like, in that direction. And by this time next year, we'll be coming out with more detailed policy proposals. There's a range of other things that businesses in this area will care about. For example, regulation. For example, labour laws. For example,
and crucially, getting money out of the banks to business.
Yes,
and speaking with Sir Richard Lambert last week, so that's the number one barrier that business people, as you know,
access to finance.
It's the barrier to creating jobs and growth.
Yeah,
and yet there's nothing in Labour's 5-point plan to say we need to get more credit to businesses?
Well, we have, and I actually ran a campaign over the summer, which was our Better Business Finance campaign, to get more capital and finance to businesses up and down the country. And one of the things that we were saying, and I understand the Prime Minister has just said something about that today, we were saying something about this months ago, was that, look, we have, large stakes in two of the biggest banks in the country. Why is government not using its influence more through UK financial investments to get at least those banks fulfilling their obligations to the businesses who suffered from the different activities that the banking sector was indulging in the lead up to the crash? And that is one of the things that we have said it should do, in addition to the regional growth measure we mentioned. I think the other thing that we've said, one of the problems with the regional growth fund is that the criteria for the bid to bid for monies is set at a very high level, such that it excludes a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. And the same thing applies to the Business Growth Fund as well. Now, thanks to pressure that we were putting on and others in the business lobby group, the Business Growth Fund bid criteria has come down, but it still presents a real barrier for small businesses in this region.
Again, if we're talking about the kind of headline figures that Labour so far has produced, we're talking about an extra £2 billion coming from a renewed tax on bankers' bonuses. It would be a one-off payment. It would do things like help, to a certain degree, youth unemployment. £2 billion is a figure relative to, say, an £18 billion reduction in welfare in the welfare bill. Coming from the coalition, much of which Labour, in principle, is signed up to. I mean, that's just one figure. The Institute for Public Policy Research says that you could still take $20 billion off the banks to contribute to the national deficit without driving investment abroad and that kind of thing. And yet, what Labour's proposing is just an extra $2 billion so far. Is it enough? Could you be accused of that just being gesture politics?
Well, I don't think you can call it gesture politics when we initiated the bank bonus tax when we did it in 2009-10. We used the proceeds of that to help stimulate the economy so that we didn't see a recession turn into depression. But I mean, the 5-point plan and the renewal of the bank bonus tax is, if you like, one half of the overall economic strategy difference that there is between us and the government. Of course, the other one is that what is at the root of this? What's the root of this is that people aren't spending because there has been a fall off in demand. Why have they stopped spending, and why has there been a fall off in demand? Because confidence has nosedived since the comprehensive spending review was announced last year. And this goes to the root of the difference, which is because of the deficit reduction strategy that they are embarked upon, cutting too far and too fast, it's crushing confidence, which in turn is choking off growth. And this is why we're saying that you should go for a more sensible, responsible deficit reduction strategy, because it's not self-defeating. And the problem with that is this is why we've seen unemployment rise to its highest rate in 17 years, is because there is a lack of confidence in growth in the economy. For every 100,000 people out of work, you talked about welfare and the benefits bill. For every 100,000 people out of work, it costs us about £500 million in benefit payments. And we're saying, if you don't choke off growth, you have more people in work. That's more people paying income tax, less people that we're having to pay benefit payment to.
You see the problem, though, don't you? That the Labour in opposition is talking about rebalancing the economy. It's talking about fairer, more moral capitalism. Rightly, in my view, it's talking about dealing with fast buck business practices, predatory practices. I don't see anything wrong with that. But when you look at the figures being produced, isn't there a kind of acceptance that we're pretty much tied economically here? You're talking about an extra £200 million into the Regional Growth Fund. You're talking about just a $2 billion extra tax in terms of tax revenues
and we're also
from the financial sector.
Yes, and we're also
won't people conclude it's not matching the rhetoric?
No, because we're also talking about a bigger difference. I mean, under the Alistair Darling plan, by the end of this Parliament, there will be a £40 billion differential between what we would be doing and what the government would be doing. They're going for, £30 billion more in cuts, £10 billion more in tax by the end of this Parliament as compared to us. That is a fairly big difference, I would argue.
Accepting that, still, two problems. rebalancing the economy towards the regions,
Yep.
and making the financial sector pay its way.
Yeah.
The figures that we're getting from Labour are minuscule.
What
So you're talking
Expand.
about
Yeah.
an overall economic strategy that promotes growth. It doesn't cut too far and too fast.
Yeah.
I'm talking about how
But I've also-
economic policy can discriminate in favour of the
Sure.
regions and also make the financial sector pay its way more.
But economic
Are the
policy-
headline figures from Labour suggesting that this is small beer?
I just simply don't accept that.
the same
And
question.
as I said, it isn't just about how much money government spends. It's also about the business practices and behaviours that you rightly talk about that we look to encourage and foster and reward. Because look, we've got a real issue here, which Ed touched on in that question and answer session, that people's living standards are being squeezed, and since 2003, middle income groups have seen their wages stagnate, whilst despite the fact productivity has increased because of rising inflation, rising living costs, and we've also got what I was talking about, the increasingly global and competitive world that we are having to deal with. And what I would say, I've been talking, as I said, about and setting in context the bank bonus tax in the short-term immediate measures that we need now. The bigger issue that we have in the medium to long term is building a new economy in the future, which is, as you said, better structured, not just between sectors, not just between regions, but within regions too, producing fairer outcomes at home in terms of better wages and more fulfilling jobs, but also in terms of a new economy where we're more competitive abroad too. And that, by the way, isn't just about spending money. That is about how government uses the different tools at its disposal to encourage the business practices and behaviours that help deliver better jobs, which are better paid and more fulfilling, but also more competitiveness abroad. And the government isn't talking about any of that at all.